Let me start with you, sir.
Yeah.
Where is the scientific data or research that prove that immigrants are not entrepreneurial? Places like New York, you go to every corner, the grocery store, the manufacturing plant, they're Korean, they're Hispanic. I don't know what you mean when you talk about immigrants, because then you say Koreans, they are immigrants too. So I am a little confused here.
I'd be happy to explain that. Anecdotes, unfortunately, don't tell us anything about the broad situation. There are, in fact, large numbers of immigrant entrepreneurs. But the Census Bureau, in various surveys, asks whether people are self-employed or not. That's essentially the marker of being owning a small business, being entrepreneurial. And the fact is that the most recent data, this is from 2005, shows that about 11% of foreign-born people in the United States, regardless of who they are, where they're from, when you put them all together, 11% of immigrants are self-employed versus about 13% of native-born Americans.
Okay.
So that means there's a lot of immigrant entrepreneurs. It's just that they're no more likely to be entrepreneurs than the native-born.
Yeah, the same census data shows that if we take one sector like Hispanics, because for some people Hispanics are the immigrant, are the fastest growing sector. And in places like New York, Hispanic businesses are even triple the national average. So I don't get it. Anyway, I will recognize Mr. Westmoreland, and then I will come back, ask all the questions, and allow for the other members to ask questions.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank all of you for being here. Mr. Rector, I wanted to ask you a question. You talked about both the legal and the illegal that are in this country. Did that the benefit numbers stay the same whether they were in the country legally or illegally, or is that just for the illegal?
This covers all low-skill immigrant households, so it has both of them. The illegals probably get somewhat less in welfare, but they do get welfare. Why is that? Well, the reality is that most of them have children, and those children are all eligible for welfare benefits. They're actually eligible for welfare benefits even before they're born. Most of them are paid for. The birth is paid by Medicaid. And so the welfare system is actually focused around the child. So these households do draw down a lot of welfare. They get somewhat less government assistance than other households. But the main difference between illegals, low skill, and legals is that the illegals have very few elderly people, okay? And the most, if you look at the charts I provided, this type of household is always in deficit. They always receive more in benefits than they pay in taxes. But they really go into deficit of about $30,000 per household per year once they hit retirement. So one of the major effects of legalizing that illegal population is you're going to let them stay here over time, and then you're adding in about 10 million people into Social Security retirement. That is the single most expensive thing you can even begin to imagine. And you would be adding those people in at exactly the point at Social Security is its maximum crisis. It is an absolute fiscal disaster for the United States.
Do you have any statistics about how many of the people that are in this country, illegal, undocumented, that have compromised identification, I guess we could say, that are actually now having taxes and Social Security taken out on them that probably will never get it back, or receiving some type of benefits? Do you have any idea what
I do.
That number is?
Yeah, well, among illegals, the general estimate is that about 55% of them are working on the books and 45% are off the books. So those that are working off the books are not going to be paying FICA tax or income tax. But on the other hand, well, first of all, they don't pay much income tax anyway because of the school level. But if you look at all of these, let's throw the legals in too, because I assume they all pay FICA tax. I think that's true. The reality is that they're paying about $3,000 a year in this type of taxes. but they're drawing down $30,000 a year in benefits. So any analysis that just looks at the Social Security Trust Fund and says, oh, look, there's this little dribble of money coming into Social Security, you have to look at it holistically. And if they're putting in $33,000 a year into Social Security, but drawing down $30,000 a year out of general revenue, well, who the heck's paying for that? Well, the Social Security retirees are paying for it. Everybody else is paying for it. You have to look at across the board. And across the board, this type of individual, because we have a system of very serious income redistribution in our country, this type of household is always a net receiver from the taxpayer. The longer they stay, the more we pay. A lot of people say what we need is younger workers to help us with Social Security. As my analysis shows is no, absolutely not. What you need are higher skilled workers. They will pay more in than they take out in taxes. With a low skilled worker, the younger they are, the more they cost over time to the U.S. taxpayers because they're always net losers.
Thank you. Mr. Silvertooth, I come from a builder background, and use many roofing contractors, by the way. But I also used a lot of subcontractors. And as you know, we put an amendment on the House-passed immigration bill that we did last year that set a standard of knowingly hiring an illegal immigrant. I understand that now there is some folks out there and some conversation about changing that standard from knowingly to reckless disregard. And I'd like to know if you've looked at those two different terms and could put your input into whether the knowingly or the reckless disregard and how that would affect your business.
Thank you, Congressman. The answer to this is very simple for the construction industry. We are an industry that is defined by contractual relationships, as you indicated. The knowing standard would establish clearer guidelines for prosecution of an employer for a violation. Reckless disregard, or even a lower standard such as reason to know, which is also being contemplated currently in discussions, would lower the standard, making it easier to prosecute an employer by inferring this notion that, well, a reasonable person would have done this, a reasonable person might have done that, you didn't, so we're going to go after you. Well, as you said in a hearing earlier this year on regarding a level playing field, if you ever see one, please take a picture of it because you've never seen it before. I'm not really sure who that reasonable person is. It's a straw man argument. It's thrown out there as a standard, and it might be a standard that no business would be able to live up to. Also troubling about this, and this is particularly for the construction industry, but it would affect any type of business that has a contractual arrangement, is this notion of vicarious liability, where you're held liable for the actions of another employer and their hiring practices, but you don't really have the power to hire or fire that employer's employees. And we think that that is not an appropriate standard of liability either, particularly good. You don't have the power to do anything about it. But if we're going to be migrating to a system in which every employer in the country is participating in some type of new verification system, and DHS believes that they have confidence in the system and that they have high veracity in it, then it strikes us as redundant and superfluous, frankly, to have an employer on the hook for the actions of another. If the system's working, DHS ought to be able to catch the subcontractor.